From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I would consider the principal threat to start with Russia, and it would certainly include any nations that are looking to intimidate nations around their periphery, regional nations nearby them, whether it be with weapons of mass destruction or I would call it unusual, unorthodox means of intimidating them.
Donald Trump's pick for Defense Secretary, retired General James Mad Dog Mattis, testifies at his confirmation hearing that Russia remains the principal threat faced by the U.S., taking a much harder line than the president-elect. He also said he supports the Iran nuclear deal, which Trump has repeatedly criticized.
I think to publicly display what Iran is up to with their surrogates and proxies, their terrorist units that they support, to recognize the ballistic missile threat, to deal with their maritime threat, and to publicly make clear to everyone what they're doing in the cyber realm all helps to constrain Iran.
He'll host a roundtable discussion with Andrew Bacevich, author of America's War for the Greater Middle East, Trita Parsi, president of the National Iranian-American Council, author of Losing an Enemy, Obama, Iran, and the Legacy of Diplomacy, and reporter Aaron Glantz, whose latest investigation asks, did Defense Secretary nominee James Mattis commit war crimes in Iraq? Then, earlier this week, at another confirmation hearing, this one for Senator Jeff Sessions as Attorney General, the head of the Congressional Black Caucus slams the Senate Judiciary Committee for making 3 black members of Congress wait till the very end to testify.
Someone expressed my concerns about being made to testify at the very end of the witness panels. To have a senator, a House member, and a living civil rights legend testify at the end of all of this is the equivalent of being made to go to the back of the bus.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The House of Representatives is set to vote today on a measure that would pave the way for Congress to quickly repeal the Affordable Care Act, with no possibility of a filibuster by minority Democrats in the Senate. House Speaker Paul Ryan worked Thursday to reassure Republicans who are nervous about overturning President Obama's signature health care law without a plan in place to replace it. Ryan can afford to see as many as 23 Republicans defect and still pass a repeal measure. Today's House vote comes after senators narrowly approved a budget reconciliation bill to begin repealing the Affordable Care Act during a marathon debate that lasted into the early morning hours Thursday. The Senate vote was 51-48, with the entire Democratic caucus opposed to a repeal. During the roll call, Democrats rose one by one to voice objections, prompting the presiding officer, Colorado Republican Senator Cory Gardner, to object that they were out of order.
Ms. Cantwell.
This is not
debate is not allowed
as usual. You are stealing health care from Americans.
The Senate will be in order.
Ms. Cantwell, no.
Madam Clerk.
Mr. Kane.
When I was sick, you visited me.
Debate is not allowed during a vote. The Senate will be in order.
Mr. Kane, no.
Democrats say nearly 30 million Americans stand to lose health coverage if the Affordable Care Act is repealed. Supporters of the law are planning rallies in more than 40 cities across the country. During Wednesday night's Senate session, more than a dozen Democrats voted against an amendment that would have allowed pharmacists to import drugs from Canada, often at a fraction of the costs paid in the U.S. The amendment was proposed by Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders.
We are the only major country not to negotiate drug prices with the pharmaceutical industry. So you can walk into a drugstore today and the price could be double or 3 times what you paid a year ago. And there is no law to stop them. They can and they will raise prices as high as the market will allow. And if people die as a result of that, not a problem for them. People get sick, not a problem for them.
Among the 13 Democrats who voted against Sanders' amendment was New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, who earlier Wednesday testified against Senator Sessions' nomination to become Attorney General. Campaign filings show Senator Booker received more than $250,000 in campaign funds from pharmaceutical companies from 2010 to 2016. Elsewhere on Capitol Hill, the Senate Armed Services heard testimony on Thursday from Donald Trump's nominee for Secretary of Defense. Retired General James Mad Dog Mattis said at his confirmation hearing Russia remains the principal threat faced by the United States, taking a much harder line on Russia than the president-elect.
Since Yalta, we have a long list of times that we've tried to engage positively with Russia. We have a relatively short list of successes in that regard. And I think right now the most important thing is that we recognize the reality of what we deal with Mr. Putin, and we recognize that he is trying to break the North Atlantic Alliance, and that we take the steps, the integrated steps, diplomatic, economic, military, and the alliance steps, the working with our allies to defend ourselves where we must.
Repeatedly called for the U.S. military to be more lethal and said he supports the F-35 program and other expensive weapons programs. Following his hearing, the Senate voted to support a waiver exempting Mattis from a law requiring defense secretaries be civilian for at least 7 years. Mattis retired from the military in 2013. The full House is slated to vote on the waiver today. We'll have more on General Mattis's nomination for Secretary of Defense after headlines. The Senate Banking Committee heard testimony Thursday from retired neurosurgeon Ben Carson, Donald Trump's nominee for Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Under questioning from Massachusetts Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren, Dr. Carson refused to say whether he would allow Trump's company to profit from HUD loans.
Can you just assure us that not $1 will go to benefit either the president-elect or his family?
It will not be my intention to do anything to benefit any American.
I understand that.
It's for all Americans, everything that we do.
Do I take that to mean that you may manage programs that will significantly benefit the president-elect?
You can take it to mean that I will manage things in a way that benefits the American people. That is going to be the goal.
Dr. Carson also drew fire from civil rights groups over his response to a question about protections for LGBTQ tenants in public housing. Carson said he would enforce federal anti-discrimination laws, but said, quote, "I don't think anyone should get extra rights." Donald Trump's nominee for CIA director Thursday reversed his position on torture, telling senators at his confirmation hearing waterboarding is illegal. Mike Pompeo previously claimed such so-called enhanced interrogation tactics were constitutional. This is Pompeo being questioned by California Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein.
If you were ordered by the president to restart the CIA's use of enhanced interrogation techniques that fall outside of the Army Field Manual, would you comply?
Senator, absolutely not. Moreover, I can't imagine that I would be asked that by the president-elect or then-president.
Donald Trump promised in a debate last February to, quote, bring back a hell of a lot worse than waterboarding, unquote. During his confirmation hearing Thursday, Congressman Pompeo said he would continue monitoring Iran's compliance with a nuclear agreement brokered in 2015. He previously said he wanted the U.S. to immediately scrap the nuclear deal. Congressman Pompeo is a strong proponent of expanding the prison at Guantanamo. He's called for the expansion of domestic surveillance and has called NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden a traitor who should be put to death. In other intelligence news, the National Security Administration will share its vast archive of intercepted communications across all 17 U.S. intelligence agencies without first filtering the data to protect personal information. That's under new rules approved by Director of National Intelligence James Clapper and Attorney General Loretta Lynch. The New York Times reports that changes will give all 17 U.S. spy agencies access to a vast trove of intercepted emails, phone calls, and satellite transmissions. many of which contain private communications of U.S. citizens. Included are the FBI and Drug Enforcement Administration, which focus on domestic intelligence. Previously, the NSA was required to filter out irrelevant personal information before sharing intercepted communications with other agencies. The former British intelligence agent behind an unsubstantiated dossier about Donald Trump's activities and connections in Russia has gone into hiding. Christopher Steele left his home south of London Wednesday after the Wall Street Journal identified him as the author of the 35-page memo alleging Russia's government has compromising information that it could use to blackmail the president-elect. The memo was published by BuzzFeed on Tuesday, prompting outrage from Donald Trump and criticism from journalists who say the claims cannot be verified. The British newspaper The Telegraph quotes a friend of Steele saying the former MI6 spy is terrified for his and his family's safety. Meanwhile, the Justice Department's Inspector General has opened a review of how the FBI handled an investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server. Inspector General Michael Horowitz's office said Thursday the wide-ranging probe will include scrutiny of FBI Director James Comey, who announced 11 days before the November election he had reopened a probe into whether Clinton mishandled classified information. The FBI cleared Clinton of criminal charges just 2 days before Election Day. Many Democrats, including former President Bill Clinton, have said Comey's actions cost Hillary Clinton the presidency. Earlier this week, Comey told the Senate Intelligence Committee he could not comment on reports that the FBI launched an investigation into Donald Trump's ties to Russia ahead of November's election. That prompted many lawmakers to accuse Comey of engaging in a double standard in support of Donald Trump. Donald Trump has named former New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani as his administration's top cybersecurity advisor. Giuliani said Thursday he will accept the position but won't step down as CEO of his security consulting firm, Giuliani Partners. He also plans to remain chair of the cybersecurity practice at the law firm Greenberg Traurig. Speaking to Politico Thursday, Giuliani acknowledged he'll be connecting business associates with President Trump, but denied that presents a conflict of interest. Because Giuliani will serve as a volunteer rather than a federal employee, his position will not be subject to federal ethics laws. Donald Trump has named 2 more aides with ties to Goldman Sachs to top White House positions. Anthony Scaramucci, a top Trump campaign fundraiser who began his Wall Street career at Goldman Sachs, will have the Office of Public Engagement and Intergovernmental Affairs. And Goldman Sachs partner Dina Powell is expected to take a senior advisory role in the White House, where she'll work closely with Donald Trump's daughter, Ivanka. Scaramucci and Powell will join at least 3 other former Goldman Sachs employees tapped for top jobs by the Trump administration. Human Rights Watch released its annual report Thursday, warning that the rise of Donald Trump and European demagogues threatens human rights around the world. Human Rights Watch Executive Director Ken Roth cited Trump as an example of a, quote, new generation of authoritarian populists.
Trump's successful presidential campaign vividly illustrated this politics of intolerance, sometimes overtly, sometimes through code and indirection. He spoke to many Americans' discontent with economic stagnation and an increasingly multicultural society in a way that breached basic principles of dignity and equality.
Ken Roth said Trump's rise has encouraged authoritarian leaders in countries including Russia, Turkey, the Philippines, Egypt, and China. The Obama administration Thursday said it's ending its so-called wet foot, dry foot policy on Cuban immigration, in a move that Cuban officials say will save lives. Under the long-standing policy, Cubans interdicted at sea were returned to Cuba, but those reaching dry land were allowed to stay and fast-track for permanent resident status. Cuban officials have long opposed the approach, saying it encouraged Cubans to risk a dangerous and often deadly ocean voyage to Florida. And in Canada, Indigenous activist and former Neskanlath First Nations chief Arthur Manuel died on Wednesday at the age of 66. For decades, Art Manuel fought for indigenous land and human rights, most recently during a visit to the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, where water protectors are fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline. In 2010, Democracy Now! Spoke with Art Manuel as he joined protests at the G20 summit in Toronto.
All around the world, there's like 370 million indigenous people globally. You know, the United Nations on the passed a declaration called the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. 141 nations voted in favor, 4 voted against it. You know, Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. And those are very key players in the G20 equation. And those are the people that indigenous people come to the streets to let the government know that you need to deal with indigenous issues too.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. President-elect Donald Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense, retired General James Mad Dog Mattis, testified Thursday at his confirmation hearing before the Senate Armed Services Committee. General Mattis's 41-year-old career in the Marine Corps included field commands in the Persian Gulf War and in Iraq and Afghanistan, and began when he enlisted at age 19. In Iraq, he led U.S. troops during the 2004 Battle of Fallujah, earning himself the nickname Mad Dog Mattis. In May 2004, Mattis ordered an attack on a small Iraqi village that ended up killing about 42 people attending a wedding ceremony. Mattis went on to lead United States Central Command from 2010 to 2013, but the Obama administration cut short his tour over concerns that Mattis was too hawkish on Iran, reportedly calling for a series of covert actions there. During Thursday's confirmation hearing, General Mattis testified that Russia remains the principal threat faced by the United States, taking a much harder line than Trump.
I would consider the principal threats to start with Russia, and it would certainly include any nations that are looking to intimidate nations around their periphery, regional nations nearby them, whether it be with weapons of mass destruction or I would call it unusual, unorthodox means of intimidating them, that sort of thing. And at the same time, as the chairman's pointed out, we face now an era where we're going to be fighting the terrorist threat. I mean, that's simply a reality. We're going to have to address that one.
General Mattis repeatedly called for the U.S. military to be more lethal and also said he supports the Iran nuclear deal, which President-elect Donald Trump has repeatedly criticized. Following his hearing, the Senate voted to support a waiver exempting Mattis from a law requiring defense secretaries to be civilians for at least 7 years. Mattis retired from the military in 2013. The full House is slated to vote on the waiver today. The only other time in U.S. history that this waiver has been granted was in 1950, when Congress waived the law for Defense Secretary George Marshall.
Also on Thursday, Kansas Republican Congressman Mike Pompeo went before the Senate for his confirmation hearing as CIA director under questioning. Pompeo reversed his position on torture. He's previously claimed waterboarding and other so-called enhanced interrogation tactics were constitutional. This is Congressman Pompeo being questioned by Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein.
If you were ordered by the president to restart the CIA's use of enhanced interrogation techniques that fall outside of the Army Field Manual, would you comply?
Senator, absolutely not. Moreover, I can't imagine that I would be asked that by the president-elect or then president. But I'm very clear. I voted for the change that put the Army Field Manual in place as a member of Congress. I understand that law very, very quickly and am also deeply aware that any changes to that will come through Congress and the president.
And regular order.
And regular order, yes, ma'am, absolutely. With respect to the outlines of what's in the Army Field Manual, there's no doubt in my mind about the limitations it places not only on the DOD, but on the Central Intelligence Agency, and I'll always comply with the law.
During Thursday's hearing, Congressman Pompeo also said he believes the intelligence agency's claims that Russia hacked the U.S. election. Well, for more, we are going to go to a round table after break. We'll be joined by Aaron Glantz, as well as will be joined by Andrew Bacevich, retired colonel and Vietnam War veteran, as well as Trita Parsi with the National Iranian-American Council. Stay with us.
Dr. Feelgood, sleeping on a concrete bench. Can I get a witness? Miss South Carolina, 1975. Somebody stole your crown. You were sleeping in your happy home. When you woke up, baby, your life had come and gone. Now you're mystified, standing with the rest of us who used to rule the world. Brother Lovejoy, wrapping up a blue streak. Can I get a witness? Miss Hurricane, can't keep your hands still long enough to count your change. In your daily grind, the cost of living, it didn't even cross your mind.
Used to Rule the World by Bonnie Raitt here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We're hosting a roundtable discussion looking at President-elect Trump's pick for Defense Secretary, retired General James Mad Dog Mattis. Mattis testified before the Senate this week during his confirmation hearing on Thursday. Our guests are Aaron Glantz, senior reporter at Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. His latest investigation is headlined, Did Defense Secretary nominee James Mattis commit war crimes in Iraq? Also with us in D.C. is Trita Parsi, founder and president of the National Iranian-American Council, author of A Single Roll of the Dice, Obama's Diplomacy with Iran. His forthcoming book, Losing an Enemy, Obama, Iran, and the Legacy of Diplomacy. And in Boston, where we'll start, is Professor Andrew Bacevich, retired colonel and Vietnam War veteran. His latest book, America's War for the Greater Middle East, A Military History. Professor Bacevich, start off by talking about what you learned from the hearings and your thoughts on General Mattis to be the next Defense Secretary of the United States.
Well, what struck me most about the hearings was the lack of any interest in the recent past. The United States has been essentially engaged in an ongoing war that most people date from 2001. That war has taken us to Afghanistan, to Iraq, in a lesser way to other countries, Libya, Somalia, Yemen. And I was struck by the fact that none of the senators basically asked General Mattis, well, General, how is it that we haven't won? We haven't won anywhere, winning in the sense of conclusively achieving our political objectives, however you might want to define those objectives. And given that we haven't won, what should we be doing differently? What would you do differently as Defense Secretary to compensate for this record in which the greatest military in the world, as we are constantly told, doesn't get the job done?
And Professor Bacevich, during his testimony, General Mattis repeatedly called for the U.S. military to be more lethal. Your response to this emphasis of his on the killing ability of the U.S. military?
Well, I don't see lethality as the problem. I mean, the lethality of U.S. forces is quite remarkable. We can kill lots of people. We do kill lots of people. We can destroy virtually anything we choose to destroy. The destruction that we have wreaked in the various theaters in which we've been engaged is really quite astonishing. But again, lethality, destruction, killing doesn't seem to achieve our objectives. So my own sense is that a lack of lethality, it does not define the core problem. I think the core problem is much closer to recognizing where force is of value, where it is useful, and to distinguish that from situations in which war is not useful or is indeed counterproductive. And I think, broadly speaking, the U.S. military's role, U.S. military activism in various parts of the Islamic world over the past several decades has been counterproductive. And again, I find it disturbing that no member of the Senate Armed Services Committee is willing to acknowledge that record of failure and to ask our next Secretary of Defense what he proposes to do to amend that sorry record.
I want to bring Aaron Glantz into the discussion to talk about the questions around Iraq and the piece that you wrote as a reporter at Reveal asking, did Defense Secretary nominee James Mattis commit war crimes in Iraq? We spoke to you yesterday briefly about this before the hearing, but lay out what your allegation is and whether you think any of these issues were addressed yesterday.
So General Mattis's primary experience, indeed his only experience, is as a member of the United States Marine Corps, where he served for 41 years. That's his experience. And since 9/11, as Dr. Bacevich noted, we've been engaged in wars around the world, and General Mattis has been a leading battlefield commander in many of those theaters, including in the April 2004 siege of Fallujah, where the U.S. Marines killed so many people that the municipal soccer stadium in the city had to be turned into a graveyard for the dead. There's documented cases of U.S. Marines shooting at ambulances, shooting at aid workers, destroying shopping centers, raising huge issues, not only of violations of the Geneva Convention over targeting protected groups, but also of proportionality, because the entire battle was launched to get the people who killed 4 Blackwater security contractors in a city of 300,000 people, about the same size as Oakland, California, or Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, was leveled in response under the command of General Mattis. That was not discussed at all during the hearing, either from an accountability perspective, which is what I was suggesting in my article, questions that should be raised about whether or not he committed war crimes, but even in a more limited way, what did you learn as a battlefield commander in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and how might you apply that, the lessons that you learned through those experiences as Secretary of Defense, is simply not raised at all during the hearing.
And Aaron, in that vein, General Mattis has also been criticized in the past for some of his quotes. For instance, in 2005, saying of the Taliban, it's a hell of a lot of fun to shoot them. None of this came up in the hearings as well, right?
Well, I mean, I think that is a comment that doesn't trouble observers so much as the kind of thing that he said in front of a group of other Marines, the kind of remark that you might hear, in military circles frequently. What concerned me was that he played not only a critical role as a battlefield commander in Fallujah, but also afterwards, when he was promoted to various other higher-ranking positions, he served as a convening authority in court-martial proceedings against various Marines who had been accused of atrocities. For example, in the Haditha massacre, where a group of Marines went on a killing spree after one in their unit was killed, and they killed, according to a Time magazine investigation, dozens of Iraqi civilians in their homes and also in a car and up on a ridge. And General Mattis dismissed the charges against many of the Marines accused, personally intervening to clear their names before the justice system had run its course. And in the end, nobody connected to that massacre served a day in prison. In another case,
I want to go, Aaron, to 2008, to what you're talking about, when we spoke to McClatchy journalist Leila Fado, who traveled to Haditha to interview survivors of the massacre. I want to turn to this short video posted on the McClatchy website based on her reporting.
Yusuf Aiz Ahmed has memorized the places where his 4 brothers' bodies laid after they were killed by U.S. Marines, he said. The family recounts that November day in 2005 and says it was a massacre of the brothers along with 20 other people following a roadside bomb in Haditha. Marines raided the house and shot the unarmed men in their heads in this back bedroom, the family said. Now they are angry that no one is being held accountable. Charges against 6 of the 8 Marines accused in the case were dismissed, and 1 Marine was found not guilty on all charges.
I'm angry at those who send them innocent. They weren't supposed to be sent innocent. That's it.
The reminders of their deaths are everywhere. The white plaster that filled in the bullet holes in the wall, the dried blood that are now just faded gray spots under a new paint job on the ceiling, and the closet where 1 brother was shot inside and the other's corpse leaned up against the wardrobe.
That was Layla Fadil, McClatchy journalist who traveled to Haditha. This was way back in 2008. And talk about what came of this, Aaron.
As I was saying, in the end, only 1 person was convicted in connection to this massacre. It was just for dereliction of duty. Did not spend a day in prison. So ultimately, there was really no justice for the victims of this massacre. And that was in part because of the role that General Mattis played as the convening authority, basically the boss of the entire military justice process around this massacre, often called the My Lai massacre of the Iraq War. And it's not the only case where he intervened. He also intervened in the case in Hamdaniya, a massacre killing broken by the Washington Post, where a disabled Iraqi man was pulled out of his house and shot in the face by Marines, who then tried to frame him as an insurgent by placing a machine gun and a shovel on him, on his dead body, to make it look like he was an insurgent. General Mattis, in that case, intervened and freed Marines from prison after they had already been convicted in connection with that killing. So he has a record that really should have been examined during the hearing yesterday that senators did not ask about.
I'd like to bring Trita Parsi into the conversation, founder and president of the National Iranian American Council. Another aspect that was touched on in the hearing was General Mattis's view on the Iran deal. He was removed at a certain point by the Obama administration because of his hawkish views on Iran. What's your response to how he answered questions on the Iran nuclear deal and what the prospects are under the Trump administration for that agreement?
Well, General Mattis made it quite clear that he would not have signed this agreement had he the choice. But as a result of it not being in place, he argued that the United States needs to keep its word and, as a result, respect it. I welcome the fact that a senior member of the Trump administration is coming out with that line, but I also want to point out that the more likely route for the administration, the Trump administration, to undermine the deal is no longer the way that they spoke during the campaign, in which they would directly target a deal and walk away from it, and as a result bring about an international crisis that would put the United States in an isolated position. The more likely route for the Trump administration to undermine this deal is to actually engage in provocative actions against the Iranians in order to compel them to walk away from the deal, and that way get them to also end up with being far more isolated. I'm not saying that General Mattis was setting the stage for that type of a strategy. I'm just saying that it is more likely that we're going to hear comments of that kind from the Trump administration precisely because they don't want to be seen as the guilty party once the deal falls apart, particularly if they then engage in a lot of provocative actions with the aim of compelling the Iranians to walk away.
Trita Parsi, Mattis led the U.S. Central Command from 2010 to 2013. This was under President Obama. But he cut short his tour over concerns that Mattis was too hawkish on Iran, calling for a series of covert actions there. Can you talk about what those covert actions were?
I'm not entirely sure what those would be, but I think it's important to understand that between 2010 and 2013, that was the era in which both the Iranians and the United States was engaged in a very aggressive pressure tactics against each other, massive sanctions on the Iranians. The Iranians responded by aggressively accelerate their nuclear program, combined with a lot of covert actions on both sides, particularly on the U.S. sides with cyber attacks, etc. But behind the scenes, however, the Obama administration was looking for ways to engage the Iranians and open up a secret channel, which by mid-2012 was successful. And I think what happened at that point is that the administration was very careful to make sure that those secret negotiations could be successful, which meant that they had to actually tone down a lot of the other aggressive pressures as well as covert actions. The secret channel was kept extremely secret. I wouldn't be surprised if General Mattis had no idea about that. And as a result, the recommendations that he was giving and the pressure that he put on the administration to take on a much more confrontational approach vis-a-vis Iran simply did not match with the priorities of the administration's mindful of the secret channel that actually was starting to bear fruit at the moment.
Trita Parsi, in December, you tweeted the following. Gave a presentation to Mattis a few years ago. He told me he thinks of three things before he goes to bed each night: Iran, Iran, and Iran. Why is Mattis so obsessed with Iran in your view?
Well, if you're responsible for Persian Gulf security, it kind of comes with the territory that your singular focus is going to be on Iran. I think what the problem is at this point is that we have moved into a new geopolitical situation. And what I think Mattis is thinking, and particularly some of the answers that was given in the hearing, seems to indicate is a return towards a posture in which the United States wants to adopt a much more hegemonic position in the region, in which the main problem in the region then will be those who may challenge or question that hegemony, not those that necessarily are actually active in destabilizing the region and destroying state institutions. As a result, your focus will be on Iran, a country that does challenge American hegemony, but you will be staying completely silent on the role of Saudi Arabia and the very destabilizing role that it is playing, particularly with its spread of Salafism and radical Wahhabi Islam. And I was struck by the fact that nothing was asked about Saudi Arabia at that hearing and the role that Saudi is playing right now. And I've also not managed to find any comments by General Mattis on what his views are on the role of Saudi Arabia. And I was really looking forward to hearing that at the hearing, but unfortunately no one asked those questions.
Before we get away from Iran, I did want to ask, on a more tangential issue, though, Trita, about President Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, who died this weekend after a decades-long career in the ruling elite, and the significance of this and what it could mean for the United States.
Well, the immediate significance for this is that it actually may help the moderates and the centrists in the May elections in this year, which will determine whether Hassan Rouhani will be a two-term president or a one-term president. In the long run, however, I think it will be a great detriment to the moderate forces in Iran to having lost someone like Rafsanjani, who in his latter years became much more supportive of a more centrist and a more moderate political agenda. Because he was, at the end of the day, one of the pillars of the revolution and one of the few people that could challenge so many of the conservative restrictions in that society and get away with it. Having lost a person that had that capacity is likely going to be to the detriment of this movement in the long run, unless someone else manages to step up to play that role.
I'd like to go back to Professor Andrew Bacevich and the discussion of the hearing yesterday. The pork barrel nature of some of the questions that the senators raised to General Mattis, including the liberal Senator Elizabeth Warren, over what his attitude would be to specific Defense Department projects in their home states.
I'll answer the question, but first, could I just make a brief comment on Iran?
Oh, sure.
And although Trita Parsi knows so much more about this issue than I do, I'd offer a slightly more optimistic scenario. I mean, let's remember that the expectation was that the new administration was going to dump the Iran nuclear deal. And the fact that we have the presumed defense secretary on the record saying that he supports maintaining the detail is actually good news. I mean, it's a half a loaf, but a half a loaf is better than none. I do expect that Mattis and the administration more broadly will be skeptical about whether the nuclear deal can lead to a broader engagement between Iran and the United States. But, and here's my little bit of optimism, to the extent that the focus of the Trump administration is going to be on creating all those millions of jobs that he has vowed to deliver in short order, the logic of engagement with Iran economically is going to present itself. And the expectation that a deepening engagement with Iran can have economic advantages redounding to the United States could ultimately overturn the logic, and I'm not denying the logic that Trita was describing of a renewed effort to impose American hegemony. So I'll just leave that as it is. To your question, Juan, I was chagrined at the extent to which quite a number of the members of the Senate Armed Services Committee provided their few minutes to pose questions, basically posed questions that said to General Mattis, hey, can you promise me that if you become Secretary of Defense, that you are going to ensure that my state's investment in the military-industrial complex is going to be protected. We heard that from Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut, who went out of his way to get Mattis on the record of saying that he supported the building of more submarines, which just happened to be produced in Connecticut. And Senator Warren from my state went through a long list of assets that are available here in Massachusetts between labs and research facilities, wanted to make sure that Mattis was on the record of saying that he appreciated that, therefore the expectation that our own contribution to the military-industrial complex is going to be preserved.
Andrew Bacevich, can you talk about the issue of the waiver? The Senate just voted on this waiver, the significance of why we do have a rule in place in the United States that the defense secretary has to serve in civilian life for 7 years and not be active duty, active military. Retired Mattis has been there, he left in 2013, so he needed this waiver?
You know, if somehow we had to have a general be Secretary of Defense, I'd probably say Mattis may be better than most of the alternatives. He certainly is a more of a reasonable figure, let's say, than Lieutenant General Flynn, who's about to become the National Security Advisor. But that said, as a matter of principle, I think it's a bad idea to have a former general running the Pentagon. Earlier on, Aaron talked about, made mention of the fact that Mattis's entire professional career, until his retirement, has been in the military. And I have to say that we need to appreciate the extent to which that kind of a professional background has a shaping, and indeed, I would say, a narrowing effect on a person's outlook. If we decided to have somebody who was a cardinal archbishop in the Catholic Church become Secretary of Defense, well, we would have some expectation that all those years spent in that very specific, all-encompassing environment would have a profound effect on the outlook of that individual. I think that's true with military people, and my problem is that given where we are, our position in the world, given the absence of success of our military activism, I don't think we need somebody who has that mindset. I think we need somebody as a defense secretary who can bring to the office greater creativity than General Mattis manifested yesterday when he was responding to the questions of the Senate Armed Services Committee. He's a very conventional Marine. That's not what we need right now.
Aaron Glantz, I'd like to ask you about both you and Andrew Bacevich have mentioned General Mattis's long career, basically more than 40 years in the military. But Politico reported that his financial disclosure statement says that he's worth more than $10 million. Now, apparently, all of this wealth was garnered just in the few years after he retired, when he worked for, among other companies, the defense giant General Dynamics. Your response to this issue of his sudden wealth after he left the military?
Well, it's not uncommon to have a senior military officer go into consulting after retirement, which is exactly what General Mattis did. It is interesting that this is among the many other issues that wasn't really discussed during the hearing that could have been discussed instead of the pork barrel projects that you were talking about. You know, he could have been asked about these apparent conflicts of interest that might have developed as a result of his consulting work, and how he might deal with them. On the issue of civilian control of the military, another point to consider is that not only are we talking about General Mattis needing a waiver to this law that goes back to 1947, but also in addition to General Flynn, the incoming National Security Advisor, we also have General Kelly, who is going to be most likely the Secretary of Homeland Security. And then, of course, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff will still be in the room, General Dunford. So there's going to be 4 generals, if all are confirmed, in the room, talking with Trump, and to the point of narrowing. All of these different generals have their own perspective, but it does mean that there are perspectives that you might normally have in the room that will be missing because of the overwhelming presence of retired and current military in the administration at a high level.
Aaron Glantz, do you think that do you think that General Mattis should be brought up on war crimes charges?
I think it's something that we need to seriously explore here. As I said in my article, the case that I document regarding General Mattis's command in Fallujah resembles in many ways the case that the United States of America brought against General Yamashita of Japan following World War II. He was not accused of directly perpetrating war crimes during World War II, but he had command authority over Japanese troops that did commit very serious war crimes in Southeast Asia. And they involved very similar activities to the ones that the U.S. Marines under General Mattis's command committed in Fallujah. And this is the doctrine of command responsibility. The U.S. Supreme Court ultimately upheld the execution of General Yamashita. Other military commanders in Yugoslavia and Rwanda have been convicted under similar doctrines. And I think that this is something that really should be discussed thoroughly before his confirmation is approved. At this point, it doesn't look likely.
Well, I want to thank you very much all for being with us. We want to thank Aaron Glantz, senior reporter at Reveal with the Center for Investigative Journalism. We want to thank Andrew Bacevich, professor emeritus at Boston University, retired colonel and Vietnam vet, and Trita Parsi, founder and president of the National Iranian American Council. When we come back, we return to an earlier confirmation hearing this week. You will hear what many Republican senators did not stay to hear, their colleagues in the House and the Senate testifying, in this case, around Jeff Sessions. Stay with us.
No one knows me like the piano in my mother's home. You would show me I had something some people call a soul. And you dropped out the sky, oh, you arrived when I was 3 years old. Me like the piano in my mother's home.
No One Knows Me Like the Piano by Sampha, here on Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, on Wednesday, on the second day of confirmation hearings for President-elect Donald Trump's pick to lead the Justice Department, Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions, he faced unprecedented criticism, but only one Republican on the committee remained to listen. If the others had stayed, they would have heard the voices we bring you today. New Jersey Democrat Cory Booker, testimony, the first time a United States senator has opposed a fellow senator's nomination for a presidential cabinet post. He told the Senate Judiciary Committee that Sessions is unfit to become the next Attorney General.
If confirmed, Senator Sessions will be required to pursue justice for women, but his record indicates that he won't. He will be expected to defend the equal rights of gay and lesbian and transgender Americans, but his record indicates that he won't. He will be expected to defend voting rights, but his record indicates that he won't. He will be expected to defend the rights of immigrants and affirm their human dignity, but the record indicates that he won't.
That was Senator Cory Booker, who was joined by Louisiana Congress member Cedric Richmond, head of the Congressional Black Caucus, who slammed the Senate Judiciary Committee, saying the decision to have 3 black members of Congress testify at the end of a hearing was the equivalent of being sent to the, quote, back of the bus. Behind him were other members of the Congressional Black Caucus.
Someone expressed my concerns about being made to testify at the very end of the witness panels. To have a senator, a House member, and a living civil rights legend testify at the end of all of this is the equivalent of being made to go to the back of the bus.
The civil rights legend Congressmember Richmond was referring to was 14-term Democratic Congressman John Lewis of Georgia, who also testified Wednesday against Senator Jeff Sessions' confirmation for Attorney General.
Millions of Americans are encouraged by our country's efforts to create a more inclusive democracy during the last 50 years of what some of us call the beloved community, a community at peace with itself. They are not a minority. A clear majority of Americans say they want this to be a fair, just, and open nation. They are afraid that this country is headed in the wrong direction. They're concerned that some leaders reject decades of progress and want to return to the dark past when the power of law was used to deny the freedoms protected by the Constitution. The Bill of Rights and its amendments, these are the voices I represent today. We can pretend that the law is blind. We can pretend that it is evil-handed. But if we are honest with ourselves, we know that we are called upon daily by the people we represent to help them deal with unfairness in how the law is written and enforced. Those who are committed to equal justice in our society wonder whether Senator Sessions' call for law and order will mean today what it meant in Alabama when I was coming up back then. The rule of law was used to violate the human and civil rights of the poor, the dispossessed, people of color. I was born in rural Alabama, not very far from where Senator Sessions was raised. There was no way to escape or deny the chokehold of discrimination and racial hate that surrounded us. I saw the signs that said white waiting, colored waiting. I saw the signs that said white men, colored men, white women, colored women. I tasted the bitter fruits of segregation and racial discrimination. Segregation was the law of the land that ordered our society in the Deep South. Any black person who did not cross the street when a white person was walking down the same sidewalk who did not move to the back of the bus, who drank from a white water fountain, who looked a white person directly in the eyes, could be arrested and taken to jail. The forces of law and order in Alabama were so strong that to take a stand against this injustice, we had to be willing to sacrifice our lives for our cause. Often, the only way we could demonstrate that a law on the books violated a higher law was by challenging that law, by putting our bodies on the line and showing the world the unholy price we had to pay for dignity and respect. It took massive, well-organized, nonviolent dissent for the Voting Rights Act to become law. It required criticism of this great nation and its laws to move toward a greater sense of equality in America. We had to sit in. We had to stand in. We had to march. And that's why more than 50 years ago, a group of unarmed citizens, black and white, gathered on March 7, 1965, in orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion, to walk from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, to dramatize to the nation and to the world that we wanted to register to vote, wanted to become participants in the democratic process. We were beaten. Tear gas left bloody. Some of us unconscious. Some of us had concussions. Some of us almost died on that bridge. But the Congress responded. President Lyndon Johnson responded. And the Congress passed the Voting Rights Act. And it was signed into law on August 6, 1965. We have come a distance. We have made progress. But we're not there yet. There are forces that want to take us back to another place. We don't want to go back. We want to go forward. As the late A. Philip Randolph, who was the dean of the March on Washington in 1963, often said, maybe our forefathers and our foremothers all came to this great land in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. It doesn't matter how Senator Sessions may smile, how friendly he may be, how he may speak to you. But we need someone who's going to stand up, and speak out for the people that need help, for people being discriminated against. And it doesn't matter whether they're black or white, Latino, Asian American, or Native American, whether they're straight or gay, Muslim, Christian, or Jews. We all live in the same house, the American house. We need someone as Attorney General who's going to look out for all of us and not just for some of us.
Civil rights icon and Congress member John Lewis testifying Wednesday against the confirmation of Senator Jeff Sessions as Attorney General of the United States. That does it for our show. This weekend I'll be in Vermont. On Saturday I'll be having a public conversation with 350.org founder Bill McKibben at the Chandler Center for Arts in Randolph, Vermont at 7:30. Monday morning at 10 a.m. Martin Luther King Day. I'll be at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor with actor Issa Rae to give the memorial keynote lecture at Hill Auditorium next Thursday, January 19th. I'll join performers Solange, Esperanza Spalding, activist Angela Davis, writer Alice Walker, actor and activist Danny Glover, and many others for the 2017 Peace Ball. It takes place at 8 p.m. at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Check out DemocracyNow.org. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.